Sweden is often thought of as a very permissive society, and though that image is not entirely correct, the Swedish government is very active in sex education. Our medical editor, Dr. Tim Johnson, has been here taking a look at how the Swedes approach sex education. Has a report. Tim, good morning.
Charlie, you are right in describing this kind of mixed attitude. Since 1980, for example, Sweden has specifically outlawed child pornography, violent pornography, and live sex shows. However, they do believe in very explicit sex education beginning at a very young age. This is a class of 9- and 10-year-olds outside Stockholm. They are going to hear a story called Where Did I Come From?, which describes, complete with anatomically correct drawings, how parents have sex and how babies are conceived. The story is greeted with mixed reactions by the children. It is obvious that learning about sex at age 9 is not always easy. By the time they are 12 and 13, Swedish children will be learning about sexually transmitted diseases like chlamydia and genital warts, and today, of course, about AIDS. There are no giggles or embarrassed laughs in this class. The teacher's tone is as serious as the topic. Most of the Swedish young people we talk to seem to give high marks to their sex education.
When we first started to talk about it in the 7th grade, it was very embarrassed and everyone laughed, but after a while we became used to it and it became natural to talk about it.
Sex education in the 50s and 60s emphasized biology. Erica Nielsen, who is 24 now, remembers what it was like.
We didn't talk a lot about emotions or feelings. It was just, well, pictures about bodies and...
Since the mid-70s, the emphasis has changed. Arvin Mallorca is 18.
It was a lot of feelings, and it was just not like having sex was not the most important part of it. It was like to have a good time and a lot of feelings.
Today, sex education in Sweden goes beyond biology and feelings. The government teaches contraception for young people who choose to have sex. Agneta Nielsen is head of the government section for family planning.
We accept sexuality among teenagers here in Sweden. Because you must accept it. It must be permitted to plan your sexuality if you shall use a contraception. And then have a positive view on sexuality.
The average Swedish teenager first has sex at age 17, which is 1 year younger than American teenagers.
Swedish teenagers in the older 18, 19, they can have sex, homosexuality, I usually call it, in their homes. If they have a stable relation, the partner is accepted.
While all of this may seem shocking to many Americans, Swedish authorities point to hard statistical results. An abortion rate 54% lower than America's, and a teenage pregnancy rate 64% lower. And given Sweden's aggressive approach to sex education, it's not surprising that when the AIDS epidemic came along, Sweden was prepared to take some bold and controversial steps. In the summer of 1987, Sweden's Association for Sex Education, called RFSU, sent counselors with pamphlets and condoms to beaches and countrysides in so-called love buses, seeking to educate young people about sex and AIDS. And in the fall of 1987, RFSU Managing Director Leonard Ajax launched a highly controversial campaign, mailing this brochure, which treated sex with humor, to the homes of virtually every 18 to 24-year-old in Sweden's major cities. Inside the brochure were hard facts about sexually transmitted diseases, including AIDS, and 3 condoms.
No, it was not easy because to send 3 condoms, even wrapped in a magazine with information, is even for Sweden a real tough behavior.
RFSU's next target was the military. 6 months ago, they sent information and condoms to every member of the armed forces. From AIDS campaigns to sex education, Swedish officials are proud of the results of their teaching efforts, and they are convinced that the government's open attitudes towards sex are equipping Sweden's youth to survive AIDS and be responsible about their sexuality.
And when we come back in just a moment, we will talk to Dr. Tim Johnson about Sweden's approach to sex education. Stay with us. It is now 7:52, back with Dr. Tim Johnson. Tim, one thing I want to clear up right away. There was a phrase that struck me as odd in that piece, home sex. I think I know what it means, but...
Well, in fact, what it says, in essence, is that if teenagers are going to have sexual experiences, we would encourage them to have it in a controlled environment where they will take precautions, namely the home, rather than to have it in unplanned ways where they might not take precautions.
So it means bring the lover home.
And that's part of the attitude.
It is extraordinary to me. That kind of morality, to many Americans, might seem immoral. And yet from the statistics you quote, they really get some extraordinary results. I mean, the abortion rate being so much lower, unwed teenagers having children.
If one wants to focus simply on those indices, clearly Sweden does a, quote, better job than does the United States. However, clearly in the United States, there is a strong segment of religious and moral opinion that would say there are other kinds of factors to consider than simply abortion rates or unwed teenage pregnancy rates. I think maybe one of the differences in the contrast between the two countries could be by pointing out that when the Surgeon General speaks to this issue, he will always say abstinence is the best approach, but if one is not abstinent, one should start to use condoms and practice safe sex. In this country, it appears to me they skip the first part of that statement. They do not talk about abstinence and proceed right to the conversation about safe sex.
Yeah, and it's interesting also, you mentioned the AIDS problem. They went at it right away. A booklet that I doubt you could send out in the United States went out right away, and they've had a very low incidence of AIDS.
Well, absolutely. Now, the Surgeon General, again, in the United States, has sent out a booklet, but it is not as explicit as this booklet, and certainly it did not contain condoms, as did this booklet. And the total number of AIDS-positive cases in this country is under 2,000. The total number of actual cases is under 200. Obviously, there are vast differences in terms of numbers, in terms of population, in terms of IV drug abuse, etc. But one would assume that this aggressive attitude has paid off also in terms of AIDS prevention.
Venereal disease generally?
In general,
lower here?
Venereal diseases are lower in this country. Again, a part of this aggressive approach. The assumption being that people are engaging in sexual activity, therefore let's try to prevent these problems. Clearly the big difference between the two countries is the impact of the religious community. Not much impact in this country, greater impact in the United States, specifically the voice of the Catholic Church, a big difference.
Yeah.
And therefore I doubt that these aggressive attitudes will ever be practiced in the United States.
95% of this country in one church, in the Swedish church or the Lutheran church here in this
but
country.
very little attendance and very little impact on daily lives, it would appear.
Yeah. Tim Johnson, thanks very much for being with us.